In the past few years, almost everyone has heard how important magnesium is for our bodies and that it's required for the activity of hundreds of enzymes. And that's true. Magnesium plays a role in virtually every major physiological process. But here's the interesting part. Despite all of this, there's still a lot we don't actually know about magnesium. In fact, many things remain unclear even today. For example, we don't know how much magnesium we really need, or how common its deficiency actually is. So in many ways, we are still guessing. In this video, I will walk you through these questions, and I guarantee you will learn some things about magnesium that you have never heard before. So why is magnesium deficiency so common these days? Well, we know that the best dietary sources of magnesium are natural plant foods such as leafy greens, whole grains, and seeds. These are exactly the foods that unfortunately most people don't eat enough of on a daily basis. Animal foods like meat, fish, and dairy products do contain magnesium as well, but usually in smaller amounts compared to natural plant foods. Once you refine grains, most of the magnesium is gone, and refined sugars, fats, and oils contain essentially none. On top of that, some studies suggest that even the magnesium content of natural foods has declined in recent decades due to modern agricultural practices. So if we add all of this up, it makes sense that many people are probably consuming too little magnesium. Here's something surprising. In Hungary, where I live, the national dietary surveys have concluded that people are getting more than enough magnesium from their diet. But in other countries, the picture is very different. In the US, in Western Europe, and elsewhere, a significant portion of the population fails to meet the recommended daily intake. For example, about 50% of Americans don't get enough. In the UK, 59% of middle-aged women fall short. In France, one study found that 70 to 80% of the population doesn't reach the recommended intake. Now, what exactly is the recommended intake? In the EU, the guideline is set as an adequate intake of 350 mg per day for men and 300 mg for women. In the US, where the values are called recommended dietary allowances, it's slightly higher, 420 mg for men and 320 mg for women. During pregnancy, in the US they recommend an extra 50 mg per day, however in Europe they don't. The reasoning is that physiological changes during pregnancy and the mother's magnesium stores provide what's needed. There's also a difference in the tolerable upper limits from magnesium supplements. 350 mg a day in the US, but only 250 mg per day in Europe. And these numbers are independent of how much you are actually getting from food. Confusing, right? Even within developed countries, the recommendations are very different. So where do these recommendations come from? The answer is actually pretty interesting. In 2015, researchers at the European Food Safety Authority said that based on the current scientific evidence, it wasn't possible to determine an exact requirement for magnesium. So instead of defining a true need, they simply looked at dietary surveys from 9 EU countries, calculated the average intake, and called that the adequate intake. In the US, the approach was different. They relied on magnesium balance studies, which precisely measures how much magnesium a person consumes through food and drink and how much is excreted. That tells you whether someone's magnesium stores are increasing, decreasing, or staying the same. Of course, even this method isn't perfect. It may only reflect short-term adjustments before a new equilibrium is reached, so it's not clear how relevant it is for our long-term health. Still, one balance study from 1984 showed that men consuming 323 mg of magnesium per day lost about 32 mg daily. Here's something I personally don't understand. Surveys in Hungary suggest people consume more magnesium than in most Western European countries. But when you think about the typical diet, high in refined carbs and processed meats, low in natural plant foods, how could that possibly add up to so much magnesium? This brings up a bigger question. Are the official recommendations themselves really sufficient? Or could the current recommendations be too low? Some researchers argue they are. Since our ancestors didn't eat refined foods, their magnesium intake was probably closer to 600 mg per day. A 2021 paper argued that today's official recommendations don't account for the rising body weight of modern populations and that individual needs may be higher than assumed. According to the authors, the optimal intake, one that matches the intake of traditional populations and also the ones that lower chronic disease risk, might actually be 10 to 30% higher than what the current guidelines recommend. Another article went even further, stating that while the recommended daily intake may prevent outright deficiency, it's not enough for optimal health and longevity. They suggested most people may need up to 300 milligrams extra per day to significantly reduce their chronic disease risk. If we take a look at these risks, it's quite clear that although the results may differ a little, in general, those who consume more magnesium are much healthier. Let's look at the outcomes. Meta-analyses, including more than 500,000 people, found that a higher magnesium intake reduced the risk of cardiovascular events by about 15%. Higher magnesium intake also appears to be protective in type 2 diabetes based on several high-quality studies. Every additional 100 milligrams per day was linked to a 15% lower risk. This isn't surprising since magnesium is needed for enzymes that regulate carbohydrate metabolism and energy production. Higher magnesium intake is also linked to about a 15 to 20% lower risk of certain cancers. All of this simply means that people who consume more magnesium tend to stay healthier and live longer. Now, an important caveat. Since magnesium is mostly found in plant foods, it's not clear whether the reduced risk comes from specifically magnesium itself or from the other beneficial compounds found in the natural foods. So keep in mind that supplementation alone may not deliver the same results. That said, some studies do suggest magnesium itself have a strong protective effect. For instance, in a Taiwanese study, people consuming only 200 milligrams a day had a 2.5 times higher risk of type 2 diabetes compared with those consuming 400 milligrams a day. In that study, fiber intake was analyzed separately and was helpful as well, but a high magnesium intake was even more beneficial. There are also many clinical trials showing benefits from magnesium supplementation, but I will cover this in another video. So what should we aim for? Despite the uncertainties, all of this evidence points to aiming for a slightly higher intake than the official recommendations. The key is diet. Eat plenty of natural plant foods and limit refined grains, added sugars and fats. A quick note. Very high intakes of calcium or zinc may slightly reduce magnesium absorption, though this doesn't seem to matter much in practice. Phytic acid in grains, nuts, and seeds may also reduce absorption somewhat, but the soluble fibers in these foods actually improve absorption by lowering the pH of the colon and therefore increasing magnesium solubility. Roughly 1/3 to 1/2 of dietary magnesium is absorbed, and your body can somewhat regulate this depending on the intake and magnesium stores. We don't actually know exactly how much things like phytic acid affect this balance, but using traditional food preparation techniques like soaking, sprouting, and fermentation definitely helps. So can't we simply measure if we are deficient in magnesium or not? You might think getting a blood test is the answer, but here's the problem. Less than 1% of your body's magnesium is found in the blood. Most of it is stored in the bones and muscles. With normal kidney function, the body keeps blood magnesium levels very tightly controlled. That means that serum magnesium only changes in very serious deficiency or illness. So the most common test, serum magnesium, is actually a very poor indicator. Red blood cell magnesium is a bit more sensitive since it reflects intracellular levels, but reference ranges aren't standardized. Plus, it takes weeks of low intake for red blood cell magnesium to drop, so it's not a great marker either. Urinary magnesium can give some indication. Higher intake means higher excretion, but again, it only reflects recent dietary intake, not our long-term magnesium status. Other tests also exist, but they are either unavailable, too complex, or way too invasive. So the bottom line is this: we can't reliably measure our magnesium status. So the best strategy is to simply make sure we are consuming enough. Even though we can't measure it accurately, there are a few symptoms that can indicate a deficiency. These are muscle twitches and cramps, tremors, tingling, fatigue and muscle weakness, osteoporosis, high blood pressure or irregular heartbeat, mood swings, irritability, anxiety, or depression. Of course, these symptoms can also be caused by many other things, so it is important to get professional help to find the root cause. The risk factors for magnesium deficiency, apart from low dietary intake, are high alcohol or caffeine consumption, medications like diuretics and proton pump inhibitors, gastrointestinal disorders that impair absorption, type 2 diabetes, excessive sweating, although this effect is usually minimal, and something that affects everyone today, which is stress. Stress hormones increase magnesium excretion through the urine, which means during stressful periods, our needs may increase a lot. To sum it all up, the most common causes of magnesium deficiency are low dietary intake, digestive problems, certain medication, and increased excretion due to things like alcohol, diuretics, or stress. The best solution is to improve the diet and probably aim for a slightly higher intake than the official adequate intake, which, remember, in Europe is basically just the average. If you know your diet isn't rich in magnesium, maybe it's high in refined carbs or you don't pay much attention to it, supplementation can be helpful. I will dedicate an entire separate video to supplementation alone because there's a lot of conflicting information out there. And before we finish, a quick shout out to pumpkin seeds. Just 30 grams provide about 150 milligrams of magnesium, an excellent natural source. If you found this video useful, please share it with someone who might also be interested, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And if you have any questions, please let me know in the comments below.